We're back out in the garage this morning. So the next step, I'm going to start repairing this door and preparing the hood and the passenger fender for paint. Since how I don't have an air compressor to run a DA, I'm just going to wet sand these by hand. 400 grit for the hood and the fender. Shouldn't take too long. You could probably knock these out in probably a half hour or so if you had a DA, but that's on the list for the new shop along with HVAC. I'm going to pull the hood off and put it upside down over on these benches, and I've got some chunks of foam from the old seat just so it holds the top side up off the table, because I really don't want to dent or gouge that, so that'll prevent that. And the fender I'll sand while it's on the car. That way the fender's so light, if I try to sand it off the car, it'll be kind of flopping all over. So if it's attached to the car, it'll be a bit easier. And then I'll pull it off and do the edges of it that I can't reach. Now what I like to do, just get some hot water, and I do wear gloves now. I never used to, but after sanding, especially with wet hands, your skin gets soft, and you can sand off the tips of your fingers really easily until they start bleeding, and then it just kind of burns and feels kind of shitty for a couple of days. So these gloves seem to hold up pretty well to sandpaper, so I've started doing that now. Well, I've got the outside of the fender done, and if you can see, it's a nice even shade now. You can see some of the sand scratches running up and down, but they're fine enough that that's nothing to worry about. The sealer, base coat, and clear will cover and fill those in. Inside the fenders, I tend to use Scotch-Brite just because it conforms to the weird shapes a little easier than sandpaper. It can get in there a little better, and being inside, it's not as critical to have a nice smooth finish. So if you see a slight amount of sand scratches on the inside of the fender, it really doesn't matter. I just don't want to see big sand scratches on the outside. And one thing, when you hand sand, make sure you go side to side or up and down. You don't want to do swirls when you hand sand. So you may ask, why did you spend so much time aligning everything just to take it back off again? Well, when you're putting the car together, especially if you've had to fix some spots like here where I had to pull it a little bit, you definitely don't want to have to align parts that are freshly painted, especially if you have to use a little bit of persuasion to get things lined up correctly. You don't want to be wrenching and pulling on freshly painted parts that may crack or dent. So you want to do that on unpainted parts. That way, if you damage something, you can fix it before you send it off to paint. Now, like in the case of this, where we're painting the hood, fender, and door, you could do it a couple different ways. So like in similar situations, when I've worked with Dad at his shop, we'll align everything unpainted, take it off, and paint the underside of the hood, and jam the fenders, and then put everything back together, and then paint, like in this case, the hood, fender, and blend the door with it on the car. But in my case, since how I don't have a paint shop here and I'm having it done at another shop, for me it's just easier to take the hood, fender, and door off of the car and take it over to the shop and have it done. They can blend the door off of the car just as easy as they can on the car, and it saves me from having to take the whole car over there. Lining up the door is easy, and taking the door off is easy. It's 4 bolts and a plug and the whole door comes off. so it's not a big deal. And then I don't particularly trust that the shop will take the time to properly cover the whole car. So if I take the whole car over there, there's a good chance that the car will come back with a ton of overspray on the parts that haven't been painted, and then I'll have to spend a shitload of time cleaning up the car. I'm gonna have to detail it as it is, but I don't want to have to deal with clay barring a layer of overspray off of the car too. So that's kind of why I'm doing it the way I am. I'm gonna start on the underside of the hood. This is kind of a pain with all of the dimples and creases and everything, but at least about 2/3 of the underside of the hood is covered with a sound mat, so you don't have to get too carried away in here. Now for this, like I said before, I'm going to use Scotch-Brite, so I've got red Scotch-Brites, and I'll use those dry on the underside of the hood. It works pretty well that way. Everything that I use paper for, I use 3M wet dry sandpaper and wet sand it. So I guess we'll get started on this. Well, the underside of the hood's sanded and ready for paint. If I didn't mention it before, make sure you wipe down everything with degreaser before you start sanding. Now that the underside's done, I'll flip it over and go back to wet sanding with the 400 on the outside of it. Alright, well the hood is done and it's ready for paint. So now that that's done, I'm going to turn my attention to the door and the radiator support, fixing those. The corner of this radiator support's not too bad. There's a weld here that partially tore in the accident, so I'll just touch it up and grind it down. And then I'll sand this whole area and put a little bit of filler on it just to make it look a little nicer. And then I'll get some color match paint to paint this corner. Even though you won't see much of it, I still want it to look pretty good. The door, like we saw yesterday, the door was pretty close. There was a little dip in it here, so I took the dolly and came in behind it and the hammer and tapped it a little bit, and now I've got a nice line on the door here. Has a kind of a gentle curve. It's not perfect. It's not perfectly flat in the middle. The whole door kind of rounds as it goes down, so I had to adjust that in the center a little bit. So now, next step, I'm going to pull the mirror off of it and the door handle, so that eventually it'll be ready for paint. I already pulled the belt line trim off. This is kind of a pain, and I busted the end of it. There's a clip there that's broken off, and up at the end that's broken off. This thing gave a little bit of a fight. You can see the J-hook in here, and that grips pretty aggressively on these little tabs along the door. So if I knew that ahead of time, I couldn't find any videos or anything, but if I knew that ahead of time, you might be able to push down on it and rotate it a little bit to unclip it before you pull it up. That might work a little better. But for the door mirror, you can see grab a flashlight. You can easily see the attaching nuts down there, attaching bolts. And there's an access panel here, but I think you have to take the sail window out of it to get back to those. So probably have to do that. And at the same time, I'll have to pull all of these seals off of it, which isn't too big of a deal. And to get the door handle out, it's down in there, and I think the only thing holding it in is one Torx screw back through here. There was a plug across on that hole. So I pulled that out and you can see it in there. It's like a lot of cars, you just have one screw holding it in, and then the door handle will rotate out. It'll rotate out, and you pull it out. So there's a plug attached to it, and you just have to flip up the white clip that's on the latch mechanism. Alright, I do have the door apart now. I was able to remove the mirror and door handle. Now, to get the mirror off, I did have to take the sail window out. So you have this little foam cover that has sticky on the back side of it. You peel it off, and then it's 2 bolts here, and there's 1 bolt down there. So there's a stud at the bottom and a stud at the top. And you just rotate the bottom of the window towards the inside of the door, and then push it, and then it comes up. And then you have access to the 3 holes that hold the mirror on. And then this plug is for the mirror, so you just unplug it and pull it out through the door. The door handle isn't too bad either. So you do have the screw, the torque screw that's under this cap, and then the lock mechanism comes out. So this is actually pushed into the latch, which is plastic. So you just have to give it a good tug and it'll pop out. So once that's out, the trick to getting the handle out, I had to look it up on YouTube because I couldn't figure it out. So the handle goes down inside the door, and when it's installed, it's a little bit more forward, so you just pull it to the rear and lift it out, and it just comes out. Just comes out that way. Like I said, I did have to remove the closeout panel so that I could get up behind the window, and I had to put the window up. I had to get behind the window to reach this connector, which is for the keyless entry on the door handle. So I unplugged that and fished it out through the hole. So the closeout panel is just a piece of plastic. It sits on there. It has a handful of screws in it, and it seals it. Now, to get the window glass out, it appears to just be 2 nuts here that you loosen and then just lift it up, and it should slide out. I marked them with a marker so that I can put it back in the same spot, so I don't want to have to go and realign everything. Alright, well, that was pretty quick to get the window out and the door, the remains of the door handle. So yeah, it's actually 3 fasteners, not 2. I couldn't see this one because the window regulator was up too high. And as a note, when you take all 3 of those out, make sure you have a hold of the window because it will fall down inside the door. And that's what happened here, and luckily it didn't shatter. Yeah, the window's out now, and I was able to get to the Torx bit on the inside part of the door latch and loosened it and slid the mechanism forward, and it popped out of the door. So now I have a nice clean face on the front of the door, so I'll go in through the back side of the sheet metal and put some tape on it so that when it's painted, I won't have any overspray from at least those 2 holes coming inside the door. And without that screw boss sticking through here, at least it'll be, you won't have any paint line or anything back here. Even though you wouldn't have seen it, it would have been covered by the door handle still. I don't want to have a paint line if I don't have to. one thing to note, if you're doing this, you have to make sure to, if you need to power up the car to move the window up and down, you have to make sure to plug in this sensor, because that's the sensor for the remote key fob, and you have to have that for the car to power on, and then obviously the door panel has to be plugged in. So I guess all I have left to do here is I'll pull the rubber seals off real quick, and then pull the door off so I can work on it on a workbench. And once that's done, I guess I'll just start the body work on the door and on the upper corner of the radiator support. Get it sanded down, a little filler and primer and paint. So I've gone ahead and unplugged the wire harness. So it's a pretty standard plug. So all you do is take a screwdriver, pry it out of the door, out of the A-pillar. It has four clips, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and then just take a flat screwdriver and push the blue clip forward, and it'll push the plug apart. That's all there is to that. Took a pencil and traced around the 4 unpainted screws, bolts. There's 2 on this hinge and 2 on the lower hinge. That way when I put the door back on, I can line it up a lot easier. So yeah, it's just those 4 bolts, and I need to unbolt the door striker, and then the door should come off.